All right. Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome. Welcome to this another edition of the Kansas Association in partnership with the Kansas Recovery Office, CARES Act Recovery Funding Webinars. I'm your host, Bruce Cladney. It's great to see all of you this morning joining us. I know lots are going on right now, and there's a lot of things happening, I'm sure, in your own hometowns and across the state. So I appreciate you taking a few minutes out of your busy day to spend a little bit of time with us. Just a few housekeeping rules, if you don't mind. Please make sure you mute your microphones so that everybody else can hear. Sometimes we hear a little bit of background chatter or things like that. It's kind of interesting, some of the noises that you can pick up on these Zoom conference calls. So also want to thank all the staff at the KAC for all the hard work that they've been working on lately with Jay and Kim and Dornell and Betty. We're all trying to make sure that you all have what you need to do the jobs that you're doing. And so we appreciate all the hard work that they're doing. And also as an FYI, for those of you that are in touch with the job listings, KAC has Norm's position, the county and road engineer position, posted. So if you know anybody that's interested in applying for that position, please go to the KAC website, kansascounties.org, and you can find a link there to the job description. So we're certainly trying to get that position filled so we can get some more help out to you all in the counties. And then also work continues on the conference. It's obviously going to be virtual. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago, and we're still putting finishing touches on the offerings, and then we're going to make it available to you all to get signed up and let you know what's going on, but just make sure you block out October the 13th and the 14th. We've got some great stuff planned for you. We've reached out to the governor's office, and she's agreed to talk with us, as well as Secretary Lorenz, we hope, and some other great speakers. So if you have not gotten your name on the listserv and you're interested in that, please don't hesitate to send me an email, cladney@kansascounties.org, and we can certainly add you to that listserv. I see a lot of great conversations going on, a lot of great questions are being asked, and I certainly do appreciate the answers that are being shared. Keep in mind, that's not the official website to get any sort of official ruling, so if you have official rulings or needs, make sure you fill out the request for interpretation and send that through the portal to the recovery office and let them handle those. But as far as accounting issues and any ideas on programming and things like that, the listserv is a great way to ask your peers across the state what they're doing and how they're handling different situations. And of course, you can always reach out to myself or Jay, and we'd be happy to help you as well. So with that, Vijay, if you are out there in cyber world, I'd love for you to unmute yourself and join the conversation and take over for us. Yoo-hoo. There he is. I didn't throw that over to you so smoothly, did I? I just kind of left you hanging.
Here, give me 1 second here, man.
You bet. You bet.
Give me 1 second. Sorry.
And once again, hey, Vijay, while you're getting yourself set up, once again, my email, if you want to get onto the listserv, is, and I'll spell it for you, my last name, which is spelled CHLADNY @kansascounties.org. So Cladney @kansascounties.org, and my name is actually on my little, underneath my beautiful picture there, my talking voice, my talking head.
I'm having some trouble with my mouse here, so give me 1 second.
All right.
So today we're going to be talking about a few key issues, specifically giving you an update on what occurred during State Finance Council, giving you some time to ask questions, and going through some feedback that we have for you all as we work through the guidance interpretation process, just a way for you all to help make some of those determinations at the county level or think through your expenses. I will say the presentation and the FAQ are completed. We're having some issues with the website this morning, so that's why they're not posted right now, but The FAQ, which includes answers to questions from Wednesday's webinar, is completed. And if you bear with us, we're going to try to get that posted before the webinar ends this morning, but it is not posted right now, but appreciate your patience on that. The presentation as well is not posted, but we'll try to get that up as soon as possible. Like I mentioned, at any point, if you can't hear, also at any point you can't hear me, just please let me know in the chat. Today we're going to be talking about Recovery Office updates, some guidance that we have for prudent and eligible expenditure of funds, and then some time for frequently asked questions and go through next steps here. Let's begin with Recovery Office updates. So the first one, and you may have all seen this as well, I know there was a press release and some news around this specific update, but we're very excited to be expanding our staff at the Recovery Office quite a bit. We've added a new executive director who will be serving in a dual role. Secretary Julie Lorenz is the Secretary of the Kansas Department of Transportation, but she'll also serve as the new executive director of the Office of Recovery. And she'll work with Secretary of Commerce David Toland, as well as Secretary of Administration Daniel Burns-Wallace, to help guide this office moving forward. And in addition to that, we're hiring a significant amount of staff over these next few weeks, and we've already hired a few. And so we're really excited about that, and we'll continue our commitment to try to get you the answers that you need and the support that you need, especially as we get into a very busy time as reports are submitted and as your programs and your spending really gets underway. So I just wanted to say we're continue to ramp up and continue to be better and responsive quicker as we support you. Round one updates, it says we have it, but again, we're having some issues, so please bear with us on the frequently asked questions, but this will be a new document of questions from Wednesday's webinar. The other thing that I think we'll give you some more details on is one of the things that Secretary Lorenz is interested in is giving you all some more flexibility and practicality in the approval process of round one. And what I mean by that is we're looking at some options to allow you all to maybe spend funds a little bit quicker or not have to wait for a cumbersome or long process. And so we're looking into a way to provide you some more flexibility. And so we're going to give you some more details on that next week, but it'll be a way to help you all start making the purchases that you need to make without having to have some delays. So look out for that. And as we move forward, that'll kind of affect the next couple of weeks and how quickly you can get things going. So hopefully we'll be able to help you all out there. Round two update. So as many of you know, the State Finance Council approved investment proposals for 3 areas: public health, education, economic development. All of those 3 areas, the proposals were funded in their entirety. And so our agencies are working to develop implementation processes for those as we speak. We'll give you some more details on those applications, distribution timelines in the coming weeks. What I will tell you is tune into the executive committee on Monday. There will be some additional details on schedules and timelines for those proposals there. And subsequently, next week's webinars will also include some more information. We are hoping that in the next couple of weeks we have some applications and other materials out. So that can also be a resource for you all as you develop your programs and things like that. So we want to try to expedite that as soon as possible. We're working with our agencies as they are also dealing with COVID and putting together a lot of these programs. The one issue that is still outstanding is the connectivity portion. So the State Finance Council has requested some additional review on connectivity. That review will take place on Monday in Legislative Budget Committee and will place in a subsequent State Finance Council meeting next week. And so they will provide their final approval or feedback on connectivity, the money for that next week after some additional review. And so if you want to listen into those meetings and get some additional information, please do so. You can do that by listening to Legislative Budget or State Finance Council. And if you would like any of the materials that were discussed in State Finance Council on Wednesday, including the final proposal book, the overview, budget matrix, anything else, please go online to the link that I have provided there. A few Office of Recovery updates. You've heard these before, so I won't belabor these points. Please centralize your communications as much as possible. It helps us get through things much quicker. We're also continue to use the recovery.kas.gov email. We'll talk a little bit more about how we want to do guidance interpretation moving forward later in the presentation. But if you have general questions, please continue to submit them. We're getting waves of them out as quickly as we can. I know some of you are still waiting, so we'll try to answer them here in an FAQ or get you an email and try to get all of your questions answered. Next week, I'm planning on dedicating both webinars entirely to questions. So that'll be kind of the office hours format that you all have talked about. I want to caveat here. I mean, we can't answer every single question or be able to provide specific guidance on every single type of issue. Some of them, we are operating on the same sort of guidance, the same level of guidance that you all have received. We can provide additional interpretation or flexibility, just like we've done with the nonprofit issue, for example. But there's some questions that we can do our best to answer, or we can try, but there's a lot of interpretation that we have to do as well. We're all operating on the same level of guidance, and we've tried to put together some streamlined processes so that we can report to the federal government and that you all can get some tools to do some accounting at a local level as well. The last thing is counties should be, again, sourcing PPE from outside vendors. I won't go onto this point anymore, but continue to do that. I want to just clarify some things from the last webinar. We have included nonprofits to the definition of who can be reimbursed for revenue loss due to business interruption caused by required closures, voluntary closures, or just due to COVID-19 in general. So you can provide nonprofits funds to cover that. They just have to illustrate to you through a grant application or what have you, hey, this is the amount of money that I'm applying for because I lost it due to COVID. They can give that to you through just explaining their year-over-year revenue and say, hey, I had this much revenue last year. We were expecting this much this year, and clearly due to COVID, a required closure or voluntary closures because of COVID-19 in general, we weren't able to get there. So that can be provided. Those types of grants or loans, but we prefer grants, should go and can go to small businesses, including nonprofits. The question about loans versus grants, the reason why we are pushing for grants over loans is because of the complexities of managing a loan program during this truncated time frame of March 1st to December 30th, but also given the economic impact of COVID-19, a lot of businesses won't be able to repay those loans anytime soon. And so it is much easier to do a grant program given the scale of this crisis in communities. And the last point is that generally loans would be used so that you could do some sort of revolving program or so that you could recoup money to be spent later. But we really don't think after some assessment that it's possible to recoup funds and spend it all during the eligible time period. That's the thing that I think needs to be considered. And so even if you're getting some funds back through a loan, it still needs to be spent by the 30th. So think about the time frame as you work on those things. Finally, on Recovery Office updates, few things. One is continue to work on these reports, and we'll continue to answer these questions. And again, we are working on some additional flexibility for you all. I know there's a lot of questions in the chat, and I'll get to them at the end here. So we're working on some additional flexibility for you all as it relates to, as it relates to submitting these plans. Again, round two, as we get these implemented, they're meant to supplement the work that you're already doing, continue to provide those community level investments and prioritize those community level investments. The only thing that I'll say here is that the demand for all of these programs is much higher than the amount of funds that we've even received through the federal government. And I think you all know that better than anybody. And so working together in partnership between counties and the state is the best way to give the aid to where it's needed most. And so we'll, as we develop our application process at the state level, we'll include a question, for example, that says, have you received money from other sources, or ways for you to know, and after these grants have been given, who's gotten those grants or what have you. So we'll work with you in partnership, but we want the state to be a supplement to the work that you're already doing. And so I want to encourage you to also create your own programs. And then if there's any reason why business, and since the demand is so high, if there's reasons why businesses can't access programs at the county level, they can access programs at the state level. And as you're building them out, there might be some issues in terms of maybe the state program starts first or the county program starts first. We'll work with you on that, and businesses will be able to apply, and we'll be able to know which programs they've applied to. So it'll be as we move forward and get some more information on how Department of Commerce, for example, is planning on implementing the business grant program, we can give you some more information how to streamline that process and avoid some confusion for businesses and things like that. So that is on the horizon. The last thing that I'll say is, as many of you know, there is some significant delay in terms of a federal stimulus 4 that we're expecting. It won't happen obviously this week, and it may not even happen next week. And so that $600 payment that a lot of folks are relying on from the federal government will run out, and that is entirely a federal program. There's nothing that we can do as a state to provide that $600. That is a federal enhancement. And so I say that to say that underscores the importance of doing programs for businesses or for rent or for utility or for child care support and other things that folks need right now, and continue to prioritize those community level investments. The next agenda item is just some feedback and guidance that we've been reviewing some of these guidance interpretation requests to help you all at the county level make some decisions around expenditure of funds, what counts as necessary to the COVID-19 pandemic, and really help you all make some decisions at the county level about what is allowed and what is a good investment or a justifiable investment under the funds. So I want to say from the outset that as you all receive requests from your various agencies or from outside partners or any folks in your community, the first thing that should be assessed is this necessary for the COVID-19 pandemic, and is this need arising because of the COVID-19 pandemic? And so it needs to connect to preventing the spread of the disease, addressing the economic or health impacts of COVID-19, or actions to facilitate health measures, and also must be unaccounted for substantially different from your existing. And so the best way to think about it is start with the necessary COVID-19 priorities and then draw a line to the good programs that are needed to support those priorities, not the other way around. And so the issue with this money is that it's not incredibly flexible. It can't be used for a lot of the improvements or needs that your communities have had for a long time that you just haven't been able to implement because of issues with your budget. This has to be specifically for COVID-19 priorities. And so, although there is some flexibility for interpretation and what counts as necessary for COVID-19, we want to encourage counties as much as possible to not start with what the goods or programs that are generally needed at the county level and draw a line to COVID-19, but start with COVID-19 and draw a line to whatever program. And we've done the kind of mental acrobatics of how we interpret that, but we don't want to get farther and farther away from the core priorities that are listed in the bill, because then it becomes harder and harder for us to justify. An example of that, just to illustrate the point, is replacement of existing revenue excuse me, replacement of existing inventory, infrastructure, et cetera. So, for example, there's been a lot of questions around replacing vehicles. So you can't replace the vehicle just because it has a significant number of miles or it's older or something like that. You have to be able to draw a specific line to how that replacing that vehicle or buying a new vehicle directly supports your ability to combat COVID-19. So just because the vehicle has a significant number of miles, it can't be replaced. You can use the money to fix a broken EMS vehicle or buy an additional EMS vehicle to better provide health services. Or, for example, your public health nurses or somebody needs access. They need access to a vehicle to reach a certain part of your county or fix an existing broken vehicle for your health department or something like that. Those sorts of things can't be justifiable expenses. Similarly, we can't just renovate a building or a floor or a space because it is older or because it has to be specifically for COVID-19. So you can make capital investments in things like adding plexiglass dividers to a public-facing government office to make it easier to access. Or there was one request about needing to use a government building for quarantine. Or a government base for quarantine for infected individuals from the health department, and that building needed a generator in order to function. And so since that building was specifically used for quarantine and it needed a generator, that is an allowable expense. And so the tough thing is we're seeing a lot of requests or proposals or ideas for investment that are getting farther and farther away from the core mission of the bill. And we understand and we fully are in the same boat in terms of wanting to make the investment that we've always wanted to make. But we just want to caution that the bill is very specific on it has to be necessary for COVID-19. And the farther and farther we get away from that, the tougher and tougher it is for us to justify down the line why we're spending those funds. And so I would focus as we go to the next slide on what is clearly and directly eligible. And so we've given you examples in the toolkit. We've given you some priorities that we know are going to be very important, whether it be distance learning, small business support, PPE and testing, or rent assistance, things like that. Those are the things that can be prioritized. And as you get to multiple degrees of separation away from the core mission and you're trying to draw a line towards COVID-19, the tougher and tougher it is to justify those things. And so that's just the caveat that we want to make. And we're going through the same issue at the state government level. We want, as we think about guidance interpretation moving forward, we will continue to provide broader guidance to help you frame your eligibility decision making. And if you've already submitted a guidance interpretation request, we'll continue to respond to those. But we want to try to empower you all to make those county level determinations on eligibility of expenses as much as possible on some of those one-off things that you may get from your local police department or your local agency or subrecipient in your county or something like that. And so use that framework that we just talked about to try to make some of those decisions at the county level. And like I said before, if you submitted a guidance interpretation or there's a broader interpretation of guidance, we'll continue to get you that answer, but we want to get away from providing interpretations on one-off requests that we can clearly see is not an eligible expense or is degrees of separation away from COVID-19. And so we'd like you to start kind of making those county level determinations and prioritize clearly eligible expenses as much as possible. And then we'll continue to provide interpretation of guidance. The caveat that I want to make here is that we're operating on the same sort of guidance that you are. Everything that we're interpreting at the state level is just the federal FAQs and guidance, which is sometimes very frustrating because it's not very clear. And so we will try to support that federal guidance with as much county level, as much detail as possible through FAQs, through these webinars, through answering your questions. But we want to try to empower you to additionally work with your folks at the county level to really understand, is this core it's a clear nexus to COVID-19. And so we just wanted to make that ask to you all and provide you some guidance on that as we move forward. FAQs, and I'll start in the questions here in a second. Again, if you have any questions on the direct aid template and how to fill out, ask those, or try to produce some more flexibility on how you spend that money. And so watch out for that starting next week. It won't. What the update we're going to give you next week won't change any of the plans that you're doing or the reports that you're doing. It'll just give you some additional flexibility on when you can spend the funds. A few things. Are vehicles and health department trailers both acceptable? If it's reasonably determined the equipment was necessary to increase COVID-19 treatment capability or COVID-19 or address the COVID-19 emergency. Use the framework we just talked about. The key here is if you believe that it's reasonably necessary and it's over and above what you've already budgeted for, and it's not just replacing vehicle, it's not just replacing an old vehicle, and it's buying a new vehicle or using funds to clearly provide access to your public health staff, then that's okay. Generally, vehicle replacement is not an eligible expense unless it's deemed reasonably necessary to the public health emergency. And there's very few examples that we can give that's true. So I just want to put that caveat in there. Counties give loans to for-profit entities. Again, we talked about that earlier. It is possible, but due to the difficulty of loan repayment, we want to caution against that. And then there was a question of when considering infrastructure investments to make the December 30th timeline, is it sufficient to have the funds obligated? Can we put the funds in escrow? I just want to point out here under the federal guidance, the contract in escrow is not sufficient. Performance or delivery must occur during the covered period. The guidance gives some flexibility for unforeseen delays during delivery. But if you know that good or service cannot be delivered and used before December 30th, it's not an eligible expense. So the key here is it's okay if there's delays in delivery that weren't expected, but if there's an expected delay in delivery and it's beyond December 30th, as of right now, that's not an eligible expense. Again, we're still monitoring the federal legislation, and there's some talk that there may be some flexibility on that, but we will continue to operate with the guidance and information that we currently have, and that's the guidance and interpretation that we currently have. Payroll reporting, again, EIN numbers. If there's any sensitive information on these reports, again, it's okay to not include them. I know there were some questions about Social Security numbers and things like that. All of these reports will be securely provided to our accounting staff, and so there's no need to worry about that. But again, it's up to your discretion. And finally, thank you all for letting us know if you're using an interest-bearing account or not. We'll work with you and provide you some more information here moving forward. So before I get into next steps, I'm going to try to go through the chat a little bit here, and then we'll go through some next steps. And then again, next week will be allowed and available for questions. Bear with me here for a second. Again, my computer is acting up. All right. Great. Please advise on backup documentation that will need to be submitted with the county spending plan. So the plans themselves, so let's start with the direct aid plan. So the direct aid plan gives you the templates for all of the information that we require. For the reimbursement reporting form, you only need to submit the spreadsheet. However, as we've stated before, you need to keep any receipts records for 5 years according to federal law. And so you only need to submit to us the spreadsheet, but if there's any supporting materials that you have whether it be receipts, invoices, anything of that nature for your reporting. You need to keep that at your county level. And if there's any other supporting documentation that you have with the direct aid plan, just keep it at the county level because according to federal law, you should keep the documentation. But in terms of what you need to give to us, just make sure that you include those spreadsheets. Bruce, do you have something?
Well, I was going to say, Vijay, I appreciate that because I had that conversation with Mr. Wilson, and the question was because, you know, some counties are getting bids and things like that. So you don't want all those bid documentations and you don't want all of those proposals and things like that when it comes to the direct aid plan. Just all you want is the spreadsheet. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah, we just want the spreadsheet.
Okay.
But those things need to be kept on file at the county level per federal law, but we're not going to house any of those documents. They can be housed at the county level.
Okay, and I say that, Vijay, because you might have received 200, 300-page proposals from some folks. So make sure everybody understands that you don't want all that supporting documentation when it comes, because I think some folks were planning to send that to you all.
Yeah, the thing that the information that we need is included in those spreadsheets. The reason why you need to keep the supporting documentation at the county level is if there is an audit, and then you can provide it to us if it's needed then, but we don't need all of that information right now. Could we get the KDOC email address for submitting our grant for review? You don't need to submit your grant programs for your county level grant programs for review by the Department of Commerce. If you're referring to submitting your, I don't know what grant you're referring to. If there's a program that from round 2 that you want to submit a proposal for or an application for, we'll give you that information moving forward. But if you're creating your own county level business program, all you have to do is put that in the direct aid plan. You don't need to give KDOC a specific a note on that as well. If you have questions for that, they gave their email at the last webinar. I can put it again I can put that again in the chat. Can a municipality be reimbursed for payroll expenses for meetings with their department heads to discuss strategies for response to COVID-19? Give me 1 second here. So the thing that I can tell you is that according to the federal guidance, expenses associated with conducting a recovery planning project or operating a recovery coordination office would be eligible if those are for the COVID-19 emergency. So planning is an eligible expense, specifically recovery planning or operating a recovery coordination office. So the next question is, CRF guidance questions were sent on 7/21 and 7/27. Pam, we've checked on those. So they're as we discussed yesterday, some of the ones that were sent from the last 10 days are completed. We're just waiting for some final review. So we're going to try to get those out to you today, but I'll also, if I don't get it out to you today, I'll send an email out that we won't be able to get them out today, but they're completed. We're just waiting for some final approval on that. And I apologize. I did check on those and they are completed. Our Economic Development Board gave $500 to small business in the county in April to help COVID-19 expenses. And are planning to do another round today that are reimbursable expense. I believe so. If it was during the incurred period and it was an expense related directly to COVID-19, it would be a reimbursable expense. What time on Monday for legislative budget? Also, I'm sorry, I don't know the specific time for legislative budget. If you want to know when the recovery office will be presenting, it'll be 1 p.m. I'm sure the meeting will start earlier than that. It has a lot of a litany of things to go through, but if you want to know when the recovery office will be there, it'll be 1 p.m. and you can find it on the State House Live website. There's not a set for the State Finance Council, but we'll let you know when that's done. So there's a question about interest-bearing accounts. We'll follow up with you on that. I don't have the specific information, but we'll follow up with you on that. We'll save the chat and follow up with you on interest-bearing accounts. Can utilities be paid with CARES money for households? We've heard both ways. So you can, from my understanding, provide utility assistance. You just can't reimburse your county for utility costs during the pandemic for your county offices or things like that. Other states like Michigan have done utility assistance programs. So you can give people or residents in your community some grants to help pay their utilities. The specific instances that you can't do that is if your county has a utility costs associated with their county buildings or anything like that. You can't get those reimbursed.
Hey, Jay, can I interrupt a second
Yeah.
again? If you'll go back to the previous question, there's a second part there that you kind of skipped over about paying the bills. They use a Visa.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, a Visa bill by check.
Oh, I apologize. If we paid for an item using Visa, which the county then pays Visa bill by check on the reimbursement, do we put it paid by check? And if so, what if we don't get our Visa bill until after August 15th, but were purchased in July? So in order to submit your report, I would probably wait until in order to submit your report, I would wait probably until you've gotten your official bill back to submit that as a specific expense. But if not, I think you can let us know in the notes section, and we can deal with that. So if possible, do it after you've received your official bill. If not, you can put paid by check and let us know in the notes section that that happened. That's what you're dealing with. So business interruption can be used for nonprofits. So private colleges have lost a lot of money. Are they getting some of the phase 2 money for education? So as it stands right now, the funds provided the Kansas Board of Regents, is for public institutions. And so there isn't any specific funds allocated at round 2 for private colleges. I don't know if they've received specific funds, and I believe they have from the federal government, so that is some portion of money. But again, private colleges can apply for a business grant program, for example, and we do have those at the state level. And nonprofits can apply to business grant programs, and private schools can apply to reimbursements at the county level as well. Do our reimbursement receipts need to be approved by the state before we pay the reimbursement? So we're going to give you some more flexibility on that, like I mentioned. So Laura, I'll give you a better answer to that next week as we try to figure out what that flexibility looks like. But we understand that you want to try to get that as quickly as possible, so we'll give you some more flexibility. So an example of a direct grant would be $250 or more to every business and accounting for cleaning supplies, and they submit proof of supplies after 8/1. Yes, that can be an example of a direct grant program. So a school district might need another bus in order to have bus, since all buses run simultaneously. Our school districts in rural areas cover huge geographic expenses as the bus costs allowable. Leslie, I would say if you can draw, so from what I understand, since you are clearly, so first I would say this is one-time money. So school district doesn't need to be able to they can't pay for any maintenance or anything after December 30th. But the second thing I would say is if you could clearly say, and you could provide the justification that one of your COVID-19 priorities is to reopen schools and through safe social distancing, and you can't do that right now with current infrastructure, you can purchase an additional vehicle to clearly meet a public health priority. So if you can justify that, then
Oops, Vijay, we lost you. We lost your audio.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I apologize, Vijay, but we completely lost your audio.
Oh, I apologize.
You may have to do the call-in option like you've done before, because we cannot hear you at all. Folks, these are all great questions that you're asking, so appreciate your patience, and we'll hopefully continue to get through these questions. If you have any more, like Vijay's going, type them into the chat and we'll get to them hopefully.
Bruce, can you hear me?
You sound perfectly now, Vijay. Yes.
Okay, perfect. I apologize, everyone.
Yes.
So
there you go.
Hopefully so I think I'm supposed to be moving up here. So Leslie, I see your question specifically about guidance interpretation. So the point of the discussion today was to say if there's any one-off issues that you may be able to determine at the county level, to continue to determine those. And if there's larger guidance interpretation that we'll provide, that we'll continue to do so. If you've already submitted your guidance interpretation, we'll get you an answer on those, and we'll continue to have that process open. It's just a way to tamp down on those one-off responses that we've been getting as we move forward here, and one-off questions that we've been getting, and a way for you all to make those determinations at the county level. Again, this is a partnership, and we are interpreting the guidance as well as possible. But we want to also encourage counties to work with your teams to provide answers on that as well. So if you've already submitted it, we'll continue to give you an answer and provide some additional broader guidance on how you do it. The slides should be posted already, so please check that online. With everyone organizing being emphasized, it's hard to be able to get complete sourcing for these items and that are needed in each county. I think we are also dealing with the same issue at the county level, at the state level, excuse me. And so I would say try your best here and know that there is some flexibility in the guidance for supply chain disruptions. And so if there are supply chain disruptions, there is some flexibility in terms of the allowed period. And so we'll continue to work with you. And if we see any sources at the state level, we'll provide you that guidance as well. Bob, my comment was not to say that you don't need to submit the programs and transfer tab. The entirety of the direct aid plan needs to be submitted to us. So that includes program and transfer tabs. Like Bruce said, 100 proposals, you just submit that to us. And so to go to so expenditures to social distancing are considered necessaries. If buses are 4, then that's totally fine. That seems to me like a necessary expense. As I move forward here, you can submit your direct aid form early, so you can do that via the submission portal as needed. Do you have any guidance as to eligible expenses to round 2 regarding the rural broadband? So as I mentioned, the SPARK committee and the State Finance Council are going to continue to review the connectivity piece. So there'll be some more information in the budget on Monday.
Hey, Vijay,
Yeah.
this is Bruce again. If you're on a cell phone, you're cutting in and out, so I don't know if you have moved or moved around because your cell phone signal seems to be going in and out horribly.
Can you hear me now, Bruce?
Yes, yeah, that's a little bit better, yes.
So hopefully you can hear me a little bit better now.
Yeah, that sounds better. Vijay, it sounds stronger, yes.
So again, on the bus question, expenditures to achieve social distancing are considered necessary, and so if that's what is needed at the county level, that is allowed. Thanks, Eric. Legislative budget will meet at 10 a.m. on Monday. You can submit your direct aid form early through the submission portal as needed. Do you have guidance on broadband? Again, we'll consider that next week in more detail, and we'll provide you some details. Any investments to improve access to telehealth or telemental health or those things, and broadband as a way to do so is an eligible expense, and so those investments can be made at the county level. If employees or salaries happen to be that said that they were not budgeted, regardless of how much time they spent on planning for COVID. I don't understand the specific question. What I can say is, in terms of providing Sierra funds for administrative leave, it has to be over and beyond what is already budgeted, and planning is an eligible expense. And so if you have an individual that's substantially dedicated to COVID-19, even if their salary is budgeted, if they're substantially dedicated to COVID-19, then you can claim them through CRF. And I know we've mentioned that multiple times on previous webinars. And so if they've been spending a majority of their time planning and working on COVID-19, then that is an allowable payroll expense. And so you can work with your folks to put that in your reimbursement sheet and consult the guidance further for additional information on that. There's some questions on explanation for health department and emergency officials have been working since February and March. So it has to be, you can only reimburse for the portion that is in the allowed period. And so when you're thinking about which portion of the salary or whatever, or payroll expenses that I can reimburse, it has to be within the March 1st, it has to be within the allowed timeline of March 1st to December 30th. And so I would ask that you first check that. The second thing to check is, regardless of if they work in the health department or they work in another department, if they're substantially dedicated to COVID-19, they can be reimbursed for that specific allowed period. So the exact direct aid form that you want, that we'd like us to see. We've gone through it a few times. So I'm going to share my screen here, and I'm going to just show you where it is on the website. I think folks are getting confused. It's the same direct aid spreadsheet that we've talked about on this webinar multiple times. And it's, if I go back here, I'll show you from the beginning where it is, if you can all see my screen. So if you go to County Resources and Guidance, if you just go to direct aid form here, that's the one that we want you to submit. And that includes program tabs, that includes transfer tabs, and the other spreadsheet that we want you to submit, like I mentioned, is the reimbursement sheet for this period. Okay, so let's see here. And I appreciate Josh answering some of these questions regarding legislative budget. I know there's a lot of questions. I'm going to get through them. Give me a second here. So if a county has a hospital that is an asset owned by the city, are they considered a public entity? Correct. Yeah, I mean, if it is owned by the city, then it is considered a public entity. So we have counted, I think Debbie might be answering another person's question. Why do we need the vendor's EIN? The reason we had originally requested that was so that you didn't have to put all of their business information, and you could just put the EIN, and then we could then access their address information or their phone number or address, what have you. But if you don't have the EIN, that's totally fine. And if it's difficult to get, that's fine. Just put the name of the vendor so you don't have to put the EIN. When will the amounts given to public institutions be publicized from the KBOR funds? We're hoping to do so by the end of August, and so we're trying to prioritize the money that we're giving in direct transfers to folks like KBOR, and so KBOR should already have the allocations for how they plan on doing it. I know they're working with our office on that, and so none of that detail is necessarily public yet, but we'll let you know as soon as we have some more detail on that. But they are working on a distribution formula for those things, and so you'll know how much money institutions are getting and for what purpose. Stafford County, I don't have at this time some additional information on internet infrastructure. What I do know is that if you listen in on Monday and on the next day Finance Council meeting, there'll be some additional information. The Secretary of Commerce, David Tolan, will be providing the committee some additional information. And so you can go there first, and then whatever they don't answer or whatever is still unclear, or just taking what they said and synthesizing it, we'll do that. We'll work with our departments to give you some more details as soon as they have them and put those in the webinar. So you all have a good understanding of, as we develop applications and timelines for our projects, that you have a good sense of when those are going to happen. We've already asked our agencies to put together rough timelines for when they believe all of these proposals will be completed. And so as soon as we present those to the executive committee, we'll put them here. And so you'll have a sense of when those things will be happening. If a contractor has difficulty sourcing particular resources, does that cause the completion to be pushed past? Again, if you can illustrate that they're not able to access services or access goods because of supply chain disruption, then there is some additional flexibility there. And that applies to sourcing any types of goods from you or a subrecipient. Are you kicking guidance back down to the county level, or should we wait from you for all? If you've already submitted it, continue to hear, continue to provide, continue to hear. It will continue to give you your responses. Excuse me. And so again, the goal of this is to provide you a framework for making some of the individual decisions. If there's larger issues in guidance interpretation, we'll continue to post those through the FAQ to help provide you additional framework. And so similar to the frequently asked guidance interpretations, we'll continue to provide some additional information through questions that we've received from these webinars, for example. But the goal is to help you give you the information and the framework to be making some of these decisions and these determinations to help things go quicker and to help things be more streamlined. Josh put in the specific priorities for broadband that were illustrated by the Spark Task Force. Bonnie, the slides should be online. I'll put the link in here, and Josh, if you could do that, that might be helpful to put the link to where those are found. Oh, actually, Nelson, thank you. I appreciate that. He put in the link there. Josh, thanks for that heads up. They don't always put in the documents for legislative budget online before the meeting. And so you may not be able to follow along necessarily with all of the documents, but you'll be able to listen to the meeting, and they'll hopefully be posting them afterwards. To prepare for a point of distribution for vaccinations, possible mass testing, storage response trailers that have been directly used for COVID-19, can a building be constructed for these needs? I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head, but we'll try to provide you an answer to that here before the end, or give you some additional information in an upcoming FAQ here. Actually, Lori, one of my team members just stepped in here. So the building would qualify as so long as it can be built and used by December 30th. So if it can be built by December 30th, you can expense the construction of that building. I appreciate that. It's a member of my staff my staff team that helped with that question. So that's for that building question. JD, I understand your frustration, and I know that you're continuing to work incredibly hard at the county level to work on those things. I will say we'll try to give you some additional flexibility in terms of when you can spend the money, and we'll continue to review our processes and deadlines moving forward. But we understand that it's a tight timeline. The thing that I will say, and I know I said it before, is the timeline is set by the State Finance Council. Our original timeline was much later. It was moved by the State Finance Council, and we have to get approval of State Finance Council if we want to move the deadline in any way. And so our office does not set that deadline. And so it's difficult for us to change the actual deadline. We can give you some additional flexibility, but it's difficult for us to change that deadline. It's State Finance Council that has done that. Will they not allow encumbrances for expenditures at July 31st, 2020 for reimbursements? The point of the covered period is not when the payment arrives, it's when the purchase is delivered. And so hopefully that answers that question. I'm not going to read the entire one, but the goal of the point of the covered period is to illustrate when the payment arrives. It's not necessarily, it's not, the point of the covered period is not when the payment arrives, it's when the purchase is delivered. And so the performance or delivery of a cost has to be done within the allowed period. The payment can happen later, given that it sometimes takes a while for payment to go through the government process. And if there's a supply chain disruption, there's some flexibility on when those goods are delivered. But the covered period, I'll say again, I apologize for being confusing, is specifically referring to when the purchase is delivered or that service is implemented. It's not when the payment occurs. So that's the point of the period. And so if you're buying PPE, unless there's a supply chain disruption, that PPE has to arrive within the covered period, and a portion of it has to be used. If you're buying testing supplies, a portion of it has to be used or has to be used within the covered period. So the question, Anthony, about can you approve the direct aid plan earlier? That's what we're going to give you some more flexibility on next week on spending those funds. And so I'll give you some more information on that next week. So a significant increase in there's a question about significant increases in mail-in ballots. So it clearly, I think that is probably a question that is better given to somebody at the Secretary of State's office as to how they're dealing with federal funds that relates to mail-in ballots. But I assume that I think, Leslie, I think you mentioned that they might have grants for that. And the Secretary of State is covering some of those costs, so I would encourage you to check there first. So even if the salaries themselves, and folks from my staff team, correct me if I'm wrong, but even if the salaries were budgeted for, because majority of your individuals are already budgeted for, their salaries are budgeted for, if they were substantially dedicated to COVID-19, they can be, that portion of their salary can be, that can be reimbursed. Or if they were, majority of their time was dedicated to COVID-19, then you can reimburse for those payroll expenses. So I would look at it for payroll as, were they substantially dedicated to COVID-19? When we talk about budgeted versus non-budgeted, we're specifically talking about things like administrative leave. It has to be over and above what's already available. Have to be spent before December 30th as well. Yes. Yes. So we have the same deadline as the counties do. Earlier, the CARES priorities were referenced. Those are included in your municipality toolkit. So if you go on the website and look in the toolkit, that gives you information. There's some slides towards the end of the toolkit that specifically go through the language that's in the CARES Act and eligible funding. So when you're talking about expenditures, it's expenditures at the county level, and so as you're thinking about subcontractors that are going out and buying, or vendors that you're buying from for PPE or for other expenses, again, know that the costs, unless there's a supply chain disruption, have to be the goods have to be used, or a portion of them have to be used during the eligible period. The payment can happen later, but ensure that at least a portion of the goods, unless there's a supply chain disruption, are in the required period. Okay. So are sealed bids required for procurement or construction above 250K? Can we use a non-competitive proposal process? That is a county level determination. I would work with your legal counsel on what your procurement processes are at the county level. So I know that there's some exception for emergencies at the state level, but by and large, the state is using conventional procurement processes. But again, that's a state level process. I would work with your county folks to understand what the procurement processes are during an emergency, and do the procurement as directed by your county level individuals. So for audit year end 12/31, we know we will be responsible for single audit, which will occur in 2021. I believe this should be an expense that can be taken from these funds. However, the delivery of the service will not take place in that time frame. Could you please address? So from our current understanding, the state will be the one that will be audited, and we may ask for additional information or documentation from the counties. But from our current understanding, the state is the one that's going to be audited. I know that you all are thinking about the audit expense. I don't have a specific answer for you right now. That's something that we're still waiting for some additional guidance on from the federal government about how we do that. And what I can tell you, which is good for us moving forward, is that there is a webinar scheduled for states with the Office of Inspector General next week. And so once we go through that webinar, they're supposed to go through the reporting requirements and some information around the audit. And so we'll provide you some information from that webinar during next week's webinar. So if we have purchased thermometers on a credit card and won't receive the product or invoice until August, do we submit it on the reimbursement side or the direct spending plan? If you've already purchased them and you want to get reimbursed, then put it in the reimbursement form. Brooke, on your question about procurement, the federal guide, again, just to reiterate, the federal guidance includes no stated restrictions regarding applicable procurement standards. So the only federal regulations from the U.S. Treasury has been identified as being applicable are what we've kind of outlined already. These provisions address internal controls and monitoring and management. And our office has no procurement requirement for CRF funds, but the funds can only be used for necessary expenses. So we would just encourage you to use your responsible procurement practices as outlined at the county level, and performance or delivery of the cost must occur during the required period. For hazard pay, only for those substantially dedicated to mitigating or responding to the COVID-19 public health emergency. So hazard pay, if you can illustrate that that is for substantially dedicated to mitigating or responding to the COVID-19 emergency. So if you have accounting costs or auditing costs during the covered period, so for services delivered, you want to start early on putting things together. Again, we'll provide you as much guidance as possible on what the federal government is requiring of us, as we've done before in previous PowerPoint, so that you all have a sense of what reporting requirements they have. But if it's done during the allowed period of March 1st, December 30th, you can reimburse that cost. If a salaried employee isn't substantially dedicated to COVID-19, but spends some time planning around COVID-19, that planning time is reimbursable. I don't want to confuse everybody here. So the first answer, I believe, is yes. And again, folks from our team, correct me if I'm wrong. So if there are specific, but you can only reimburse them for those specific planning activities that they've done as it relates to payroll. So you need to be very specific about how much time they've spent and how and what they did around those planning activities. But for taking it, so they can only be reimbursed for that portion of their time. But for crediting an entire individual's salary for a period or for their entire salary for the allowed period, they have to be substantially dedicated to COVID-19. And so otherwise you have to clearly itemize and illustrate what time they spent on a specific planning exercise or something like that, or in a planning office or what have you. Or there are specific planning activities. William, you bring up an important point about being clear from our end about audit. Again, as we do the webinar next week, with OIG at the federal level, we'll give you some more information. Andrea, I just answered that question on substantially dedicated to payroll around planning, and so just clearly itemize what activities they've done and how many hours. If you want to credit their entire salary, then you have to prove that they're substantially dedicated to COVID-19. In reference to thermometers, can you put it in the direct spending plan under the PPE allotment? I would put it as a separate expense for thermometers, unless the wide blanket of PPE covers thermometers, or that's a conventional definition. So in school districts, if it is over 20,000, a bid process has to occur. There's nothing in the CARES Act that waives the state of Kansas bid law. No, there's nothing in the CARES Act that specifically waives any procurement law. It doesn't state anything related to procurement. It only states the provisions that I outlined earlier. And so work with your counties to institute responsible procurement practices. Again, I don't know if in your county or in in the law or in your interpretation, if there are some exceptions for emergency. I don't know. I'm also not a lawyer, so I don't want to give you any advice there. The clear thing is the federal government does not have any stated restrictions or flexibility or stated flexibility in terms of procurement, and so it's up to the state and the counties as to responsible procurement. The performance of delivery still has to occur in the reported period. Can we calculate as a percentage of time as those helping with reporting or breaking out by hours? I know Taylor's not on the line, so I don't know specifically how the payroll guidance was, or the payroll examples were given, but I assume that that's okay to report it as a percentage necessarily. But as long as the numbers work out, and what I mean by that is you're only requesting hours for what they've specifically done planning services for. Saying it as a percentage or saying it as hours doesn't matter. It's just the amount has to be correct for how much they've actually done for. Can the 5% administrative fee given to county employees because of the hours? Because of the hours they've dedicated to reporting and planning for Spark. I don't know specifically what you mean by that, Lori. When we say 5% administrative fee, we didn't mean that you're charging a 5% administrative fee. We meant that you should allocate 5% for administration of programs, administration of the funds, including your accounting firm or your consultants or what have you. So as I said before, if there's some costs that you have around planning or you have individuals that are substantially dedicated to COVID-19, then you can try to illustrate those in your reimbursement form. Can you give us the differentiation between the transfer application and the program application? Sure. So if you're providing a bulk amount of funds to a subrecipient that they want to spend flexibly, then you would do a transfer. So if you're giving $400,000 to a city for buying a whole host of things, you would do a transfer. You're giving $500,000 to a school district for a whole host of things, then you would give them a $400,000 transfer and ask them, just like you submitted a direct aid plan to us for your flexible fund, have them submit a direct aid plan. Think of it like you're giving them their own direct aid spending form to fill out. A program is any new initiative that you're providing funds to entities through an application or other type of distribution method. So if you're providing grant funds to a small business, or you have a PPE, a pot of PPE that you're then providing through an application to multiple entities. And so a program would go to various entities based on an application, and a transfer is a bulk pot of money that you are giving to a public subrecipient to then spend flexibly on anything they would need to moving forward. The next question, I'm going to end here in a couple of minutes. Again, we'll have more time for questions moving forward. So will we still be able to keep all the money in the county in the event that some particular expenditure is denied? So if it's denied, then you'll have to find a way to reallocate it towards an actual eligible expenditure. If you can't allocate it to an eligible expenditure, then you can't keep the money, then the funds will be recouped. So as long as you can give us a clear purpose for those funds that's an eligible expenditure within the allowed period, then you can keep the money if your first preference is denied as an ineligible expenditure. EMS employees. So I don't know the answer to that. I'm going to have to get back to you on that question. Again, the guidance says substantially dedicated to COVID-19. I don't know the answer to that, and so I'll have to get back to you on that. Josh, thank you. Taylor is checking on using a percentage rather than hours related to Andrea's question. And so, Andrea, I will try to get back an answer to you during the next webinar. So commissioners have selected 3 individuals that are county employees to administer Spark funds. Can employees receive that money individually? So again, if they're substantially dedicated to COVID-19, you could credit their salary. I think what you're asking is, can they be provided additional funds as terms of like a bonus for Spark, for administering Spark? Lori and Ray, I don't know the answer to that question right now, and that's one that I'll mark for myself to give you an answer on. I know that's been one that's been asked. There's one other question on contact laborers that, again, Tammy, I'm going to have to get back to you. Wait, let me give me 1 second here as I look through it. Employees, it would be reimbursed. If they're employees, it would be reimbursed salaries. They were appointed as employees and are not working as contract laborers, correct? Tammy, I think you're referencing Lori and Renee's question. From my current understanding, yes, you would just be reimbursing their salaries since they were employees already. I don't know about providing additional bonuses using Spark money to existing employees. Again, I'll get back to you on that. My current understanding is that you can only reimburse their salaries for county employees for the time that's either they spent on COVID or their entire salary if they're substantially dedicated to COVID. I'm going to go ahead and end here. So I know we've answered a lot of questions. And those are some that are outstanding. We'll continue to answer questions. Continue to be patient with us here, and I appreciate everybody's patience. As you can tell, there's a lot of questions associated with this money. We won't be able to answer and specifically provide you a satisfactory answer sometimes on every single question, because we are dealing with the same sort of guidance that you are, and so we can provide our best interpretation on things, but sometimes we just have to kind of try to work through it and try it and see how it works, and as much as possible, kind of build the plane as we fly it here. And so be patient with us and continue. And we appreciate everyone continuing to be flexible and patient as we move forward here. We are also kind of a limited staff here, and we're trying our best to staff up and get your questions, but we appreciate everyone's patience and all their work, and we'll continue to try to get you the answers that you need moving forward. But just know we're working on the same sorts of limitations that you are as you build out these plans. And so we'll continue to provide you FAQs. Watch out for the meetings next week, and we'll see you next Wednesday.
All righty, Vijay. Vijay, we can't thank you and the rest of your staff enough. I know as you were going down the chat, you kept skipping over all the accolades, and I'm not going to skip over the accolades. We're going to definitely say thank you to you and to Taylor and to the rest of the staff for being there for us. I know it's been a little bit frustrating on both sides as I sit here and listen to you talk and I hear some of the questions being asked. And I understand what your request is of folks. The request is to kind of use the resources that you have provided. And, you know, when people start talking about, is this acceptable? Is that acceptable? You've answered a lot of questions, you know, and so kind of we're asking you all to kind of make those interpretations yourself. I mean, for example, if Vijay said, is a school bus, you know, allowable, and Vijay said, yeah, it is because of social distancing, well, maybe there's another vehicle that you're going to use for COVID response. Well, that would make sense that that's allowable too. If he's allowing a school bus and an ambulance to be bought, well, maybe he's allowing a 4x4 to be bought to go out into the backcountry to help with COVID-19 responses. Those are the types of questions I think Vijay's asking you all to kind of take responsibility for, just to kind of say, well, that same question has been asked in a different way, so let's apply it to our situation. Let's go for it. You know, that type of thing. So I think I don't think he's passing the buck down to you. He's not passing responsibilities. He's just asking you to use the tools and the resources that they've worked hard to create to make sure that you guys are answering your own questions as best as you can. And then if you do get stumped with some weird off-the-wall stuff, reach out to them. So With that, folks, I'm not going to take up anybody's any more time. We certainly do appreciate all that you are doing for us and with us at the Kansas Association of Counties, and we appreciate you joining the Zooms here every week. And Vijay, I heard you say that we're going to do this again on Wednesday, so we'll get the link out to you all first of next week, so be looking for that in your emails. Once again, if you want to be on the listserv where some of these questions are still being discussed, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, and we will get your name put onto the listserv, and that way you can stay in contact with your fellow workers out there in the state getting all this work done. So with that, folks, we'll have a great rest of the day, a great weekend. Stay safe, and we'll see everybody next week. All right? Take care now. Bye-bye.